समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
If Donald Trump has been sulking with India and Prime Minister Modi over Operation Sindoor or India's refusal to bite the bait on a possible Nobel Prize nomination for the American president, well, he'll be sulking a lot more this week as the images come out of China at the SCO Summit, where the Prime Minister has met with Xi Jinping and will also be holding a separate bilateral with Vladimir Putin. It could be argued that the SCO Summit is independent of what has happened with Trump's tariff war. It could be argued that the process of cautious rapprochement between India and China had started well before Trump unleashed his tariff war. But the images coming out of China acquire a whole different dimension given the state of play, in particular between New Delhi and Washington. I'm Barkha, here with the Mojo story. The big story today is the meeting between India and China, between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping. This interaction, this visit by the Prime Minister after a gap of 7 years, Modi in China after a gap of 7 years. This is, of course, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization known as the SCO Summit. Many other leaders there on that red carpet laid out by Xi Jinping for Prime Minister Modi. And those other leaders are also significant. Vladimir Putin of Russia is among them. This at a time, and that's the family portrait out of the SCO Summit, this at a time when Trump is, quote unquote, penalizing India for the purchase of Russian oil. What's important is a conversation that has taken place between Zelensky and Modi hours before Prime Minister Modi touched down in China. Trump, whether knowingly or unknowingly, has upended geopolitics. Many in India believe that India cannot trust China given what's recently happened in Operation Sindoor. But if Trump is transactional, other countries have to adapt and make their own well thought out and pragmatic moves on the global chessboard. What might the shape of geopolitics look like in the next few weeks and months? Let me introduce our very distinguished panel of experts today as we decode the Prime Minister's big China meeting. Joining me first up is Evelina Sharakova. I want to welcome her to the program. She is a geopolitical strategist and founder of FACE. It's good to see you. Joining us from Vienna today. Joining us from the United States today is Ali Wine. He's a senior research and advisor at the ICG. In particular, looking at the relationship between US and China. Good to have you with us, Ali. Also joining us is veteran diplomat, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. Good to see you, sir, as always. And military veteran, former General Officer Commanding of the 15 Corps, General Satish Dua, is with us. General Dua led, of course, the surgical strikes after the terror attack on the Uri camp. In particular, what's happening right now is very interesting because at least 3 of the countries at the SCO, Pakistan, Turkey, and China, are countries that India has had a problem with in Operation Sindoor. And I want to look at that also as we look at all of the pieces on the chessboard moving forward. I want to open with a brief clip of the Prime Minister, his comments released to the public. Also a very interesting statement from the Foreign Ministry saying that India and China are not rivals but partners. And that statement also underscoring strategic autonomy of India's decision making, in particular important given Trump and his aides, Peter Navarro and others, trying to dictate to India what India's choices should be. Take a look at the Prime Minister's statement.
फिर से शुरू की जा रही है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध हैं। एथेंस चीन द्वारा SCO की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। एक बार फिर चीन यात्रा के निमंत्रण के लिए और आज की हमारी बैठक के लिए आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद।
So the gist of that, there the Prime Minister is stressing that 2.8 billion lives are dependent on relationship and the relationship between India and China. Also, the Foreign Ministry, the MEA, issuing its own statement on how India and China are partners, not rivals. Xi Jinping, in his own statements, in his interaction with Prime Minister Modi, spoke about how the elephant and the dragon must come together. That was the statement we got from Xi Jinping. So those are the big headlines coming out of China today. I want to open this up now. Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, they say a week is a long time in politics, but it seems a week is an even longer time in geopolitics. Who would have thought that just weeks after India's military action on Pakistan, Operation Sindoor, where India's army said on record that China was backing Pakistan with live inputs and not just with weaponry, where India expressed its concern with Turkey's support to Pakistan. We have Turkey, Pakistan at the same summit as India. I understand it's a multilateral summit. We've always honored the SCO. I understand this is pre-scheduled, but the elevation with all the heads of state in attendance, I think that's what acquires a new meaning in the backdrop of Trump's tariff war, which seems to be getting worse and worse when it comes to India and America. How do you look at the optics and also the statements coming out of China?
So it's very difficult not to understand the optics of the meeting, frankly. Given the geopolitics that has preceded this particular time, I think it's important just to see the two leaders bond with each other, Putin tomorrow and so on. So anybody who dismisses it all by saying, listen, this is a multilateral get together, blah, blah, forget it. That would be a mistake, Barkha. But the problem I have is also the crime that observers can commit in the opposite direction, which is to overinterpret the meeting, the results. And that, I think you cannot fall into either trap. And if you allow me a minute, I will just summarize for you my reading. I think the biggest rhetorical concession by India is Xi Jinping said in his statement that we are development partners, not rivals. The Indian MEA statement has picked it up and said both leaders reaffirmed that. That to me is a big, big departure from the past. We have viewed China as nothing but a rival in the past. We have never said we are not rivals. You can say we are development partners, and if you had left it at that, I would have said that's par for the course. But you've gone and said now that we are development partners, not rivals. So the first point is, I think there is a subtle shift, if you like, from my perspective, where I think India believes, at least in economic and trade terms, we cannot afford to be rivals with China. I underline this is only economic and trade terms. And that is why the statement says development partners and not rivals. The problems remain. For example, the statement by Xi Jinping says, don't allow the border issue to define the overall relationship. Something we have struggled to convince the Chinese that, listen, you have to address the border issue. You cannot set it aside and pretend everything is normal. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, I think, is also that we keep saying multipolar Asia, and we keep saying that, listen, the three mutuals, mutual sensitivity, mutual interest, and mutual respect. But from their side, it's always only a multipolar world. There is no mention of multipolar Asia. So I would say that the fundamentals of the relationship have remained. I think there have been a few concessions by India, and this is in response also to China lifting the restrictions on turbo these boring machines and rare magnets and so on. So in economics and trade, India has come to the conclusion that US and the West is going to be unreliable. And therefore, we have no choice. There are also dependencies that India has on China. I think the last thing I will say is the meeting by the Prime Minister with Kai Chi should not be underestimated. The PM met with Xi Jinping, but he also had a separate meeting with Kai Chi. Those who understand China and the Chinese hierarchy know that Kai Chi is a very, very important standing member of the Politburo, member of the Standing Committee, but also he's the chef de cabinet. In many ways, you could ask, why the hell is PM meeting him? But I think there are reasons why he's meeting, and that is to implement some of the understandings reached by the two leaders. So all in all, a very, very interesting summit. Don't fall into either of the two traps. Don't pretend it's nothing, but don't think that there is a paradigm shift. Obviously, geopolitical window that has been offered these two leaders.
Right. Let's open this up now. How do you see it, Alif? What's the view from Washington? We've seen now the New York Times confirming reports that were first reported by a German newspaper, then followed up by an Indian newspaper, that Trump wanted to speak with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister was not keen because there was some skepticism within the government here on how Trump would play out those comments in public as he is inclined to do. There's also a feeling here, and Ambassador Kumar is one of those who's repeatedly pointed it out, that Trump may want to close a deal with China of his own. And therefore, maybe that's one reason to actually make Delhi understand that its relevance to the United States as a countervailing force to China may no longer be its operational value. What is the view from Washington on this meet that is taking place in China?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program. I think it's difficult to overstate the significance of the shift in American foreign policy. I mean, if you keep in mind, on a bipartisan basis, going back about a decade, one of the pillars of America's strategy, I should say its former strategy or its erstwhile strategy towards China, has been an Indo-Pacific strategy. And you can't have an Indo-Pacific strategy, of course, without a strong US-India relationship. And again, that relationship, the momentum of that relationship has progressed on a bipartisan basis. I think now there are real questions about the direction of the US-India relationship. And by extension, therefore, there are real questions about the viability of the Quad. There are real questions about the logic of the Indo-Pacific strategy that has guided US policy towards China. So I think a lot of uncertainty right now. I would underscore the ambassador's comments. I think we shouldn't overstate the significance of what's taking place. Look, if you look at the relationship between China and India, to the extent that India is taking more conciliatory steps towards China, it's not doing so out of affinity. It's not doing so out of newfound strategic trust with China. It's doing so because it feels now that because of a disruption in its relationship with the United States, it needs to pursue sort of simultaneous de-risking. And this simultaneous de-risking to some extent from China, de-risking from the United States, I think it's in keeping with what the External Affairs Minister has often talked about, a strategy of multi-alignment. And multi-alignment is a pragmatic disposition. You are aligning yourself selectively with different countries, depending on certain issues, depending on certain interests. So we don't want to aggrandize and say that now that China and India have newfound strategic trust, but certainly there is, I think, a disjuncture in the US-India relationship. And there are real questions, not only about how the relationship will evolve over the next 3.5 or so years of the second Trump administration, but let's say that we have, come January of 2029, even if we have a next American president who wants to go back to sort of the status quo ante of US-India relations, it's not clear to me that that next president would be able to go back. I think that India's feeling is, my sense is that, look, the United States is now more unpredictable than we had anticipated. And so we have to be much more pragmatic, much more omnidirectional in our foreign policy going forward.
I would actually agree with that interpretation. I think a lot of people who know this space say that America-India is deeper than a whimsical individual. However, I think it will take a while before India is able to feel that institutional trust again in a single country. I want to bring in General Dua and then come to Vilena. General Dua, one must remember and remind our audience that while this meeting is taking place, there are thousands of Indian and Chinese soldiers standing eyeball to eyeball in eastern Ladakh, in the high Himalayas, and that has happened after what happened in Galwan in 2020. There is also Operation Sindoor, which officially is not over, it is only on pause. Pakistan, we recognize to be from an Indian perspective, a vassal state of the Chinese. The deputy chief of India's army went on record to say that China provided live inputs to Pakistan in this conflict. I don't think many Indians will be jumping to trust China. But I think what Ali just said is probably true, that there's a sense now that don't trust anybody too much. Don't trust the Chinese too much. Don't trust the Americans too much. The values-based, shared values-based foreign policy regime or age is over. Just be extremely transactional, because that's how the world is going to be with you.
Thank you, Barkha. Normally it's said that I would say, I'm going to start with your last sentence. Actually, I will end with your last sentence. Don't trust anyone too much. Okay. Yes, we have issues with China. I'm not talking as a military man. Our security issues, you pointed them out very clearly. The first is our border problem over decades, exacerbated 5 years ago by this Galwan and Pegongsu incidents. And our armies in large numbers are arrayed against each other in eastern Ladakh across the LAC. And second is the issue of Operation Sindoor, which is on a pause, not stopped. In that, not only Chinese, give them intelligence and platforms, but they also, their weapon systems and platforms were also used by Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. We have those issues. As a military man, I should stop here by saying that, yes, we have these issues, we have those concerns, and we can't be fully trusting of each other. But as an informed citizen, I also see that while after Galwan, a little climb down on Galwan and eastern Ladakh happened, between India and China, there have been 23 or 24 different dialogues. And we are trying to move on the negotiating table and trying to sort of improve things while our deployments, military deployments, stay. So we are moving forward. In fact, as we know, in the last 5 years, our trade between India and China has actually increased substantially. There has been a significant increase in trade despite our issues in Ladakh, on our borders, and the issues of Operation Sindoor. So having said that, rest, like Ali brought out, and we are all sort of discussing that our multilateral engagements are the order of the day. So I suppose at the end of the day, India or any other country perhaps will do what is in its national interest, and that's the bottom line. I think whether it is military dimension, whether it is economic dimension, or a geopolitical dimension, we are going to do what is in our national interest while new paradigms are being thrown up. And here I would like to end with what you said. Don't trust anyone too much, and that holds very good for military. While all these confabulations may take place, reordering of geopolitical environment may be a tall phrase, but at least this moment will be remembered. I mean, I'm talking of Trump's tariffs now on India, will be remembered as an inflection point going forward if any realignments do start taking place. So the last sentence from my side as a military man again, we cannot lower our guard. We have to be prepared to face China on the borders while we continue to engage with them. But we also need to factor in their support, that is Chinese support, active support to Pakistan, and our issues with Pakistan of cross-border terrorism and the line of control. So wariness on one side, but I suppose it should not rule out movement on the other.
Yeah, I think we all seem to be agreed that India's way forward is multipolarity. And the irony is that you have Trump's aides like Peter Navarro actually pushing, that if you think of, if you want a strategic partnership, pick a side. And I think the chances of that, if ever they were higher, are today significantly lower for the foreseeable future. You mentioned, General Dua, the trade during April to July 2025-26, India's exports to China rose 19.97%, almost 20%, to about nearly $6 billion. And the imports also increased by about 13%. So this is what I think Ambassador Kumar was also making the point about an economic relationship. But can an economic relationship be divorced from strategic tensions is something I want everybody to think about. In the meantime, I want to bring in Belina. Something we need to talk about is also other leaders at the summit. Putin, there's going to be a bilateral between Putin and Modi. Zelensky has picked up the phone and called Modi. We also have interesting figures now available, Verena, on India supplying energy to Ukraine, which really busts the American argument in a couple of different ways. One, we of course know that Europe, while India is buying crude from Russia, it's refining it, and that refined oil is then being bought by Europe to a value of about $15 billion. Even the Americans are buying petroleum products from India. We now have two different headlines. One that says the Americans are pushing Europe to impose similar tariffs on India like the Americans have. Two, we also have data out on India supplying Ukraine some of its energy needs. I'm wondering how you're joining the dots between all of these seemingly contradictory data points.
Thank you for inviting me to your show, Barkha. It's a great pleasure being here. Let me start first and foremost with the big framework, which is, of course, about mostly China, United States, Russia, India. That's the big framework. That is why we should really be mindful of, not making too extreme conclusions on what's happening right now. The way I see it is, first and foremost, most overlooked geopolitical development from 2024, the launch of normalization of relations between China and India hasn't been discussed, for instance, in Europe, in the so-called West at all. And that's why right now, if you take a look at the Western analysis, you will find out that they think and are convinced that this meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping is happening because of Trump, which has nothing to do directly with Trump and has happened prior to the election of Trump. It's very important, especially here in the so-called West. Second important point is that the way I see it is that this relationship, one of the key relationships that will define and shape the future of the world order in the years to come, in the decades to come, has moved from crisis management towards not just normalization, but what I call managed confrontation. So Cold War-like confrontation, which is good news. It means that both rivals want to reduce the risk of any possibilities for direct confrontation. That's good news, not only for my military colleagues, but also for security experts. Now, of course, confrontation still remains confrontation, and that means that, and this is the third point I want to make before I move to the other actors attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is the way I look at the current framework of the world order is much different from what's the main stream narrative about the multipolarity. I don't see any multipolarity at this system level. The way I see it is a Cold War 2.0 between America on the one hand and the dragon bear on the other. That's Putin, Xi Jinping modus operandi of strategic coordination in all relevant, systemically important domains. And India is the only geopolitical bridge builder that can operate at systemic level. What does it mean? It can actually operate with both sides. It can take the best from both worlds, from the so-called Western world, because it's not only about US, it's about Canada, it's about the European partners, and so on and so forth. It's about Australia, Japan, South Korea. And then we have, of course, the dragon bear system. That's what's happening right now in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's the narrative, that's the mindset, that's the agenda that's being presented to key partners in the so-called global South. And India is the only player that can navigate and can play a real equidistance right now between these two blocks. Okay, it means that this strategic autonomy has its price, right? That's why we are having this troubled relationship with Trump. I do not share the opinion of many of my Western colleagues claiming that this is the lowest point of the relationship. I am still certain that there will be a kind of managed relationship with Trump, between Trump and Modi. But then again, you also see why there is a deepening of the relationship between Modi and Xi Jinping, and not to speak of the deepening of the strategic partnership with Russia. The relations between India and Russia have never been that good as of 2025.
I want to ask you about this formulation of yours, that this is actually Cold War 2.0, in which you see India playing perhaps the only major power that can build bridges across the trenches. Is that how you're seeing India's role?
Yes, and strategic autonomy has its price. That is what's happening right now, because your second part of the question was about the other actors. You gave examples of how, the Russian war on Ukraine was rebranded as Modi's war, which is totally incorrect. It's just a narrative that fits the Trump theme right now, because they are trying to somehow push for direct Putin-Zelensky meeting, and they try to use also pressure on key allies of Russia to exercise, to make it happen. That's why, I can just not buy into this current narrative when it comes to, for instance, the weaponization of commodities. Everybody is doing that right now. Every single player is currently weaponizing oil or gas or other key, commodities. The whole, we can, of course, discuss, we don't have the time right now, the main reason why there was this short-term deterioration of the US-India relationship. But I can assure you of one thing: it was not about the Russian oil.
Oh, that I think we all agree. I think nobody here believes that what has happened between Trump and India has anything really to do with the purchase of Russian oil, Velina. I'm intrigued by this formulation of a Cold War 2.0. Once again, we stand in that kind of world, according to Velina. Ambassador Kumar, do you think there's some truth to it, where India has a unique position to actually speak across the trenches?
I agree with one part of what Belina is saying, which is that certainly among the...
Sir, can't hear you. We can't hear you, Ambassador Kumar.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so I agree with one part of what Ms. Belina is saying, I was saying, which is that we, I think, have a unique position as a bridge builder. That part of it, I agree. It may not be that way now because of the troubled relationship with US. I also agree with her, by the way, that this cannot possibly last too long. There are too many interests between India and the US. I think we will come to some kind of agreement. I think there will be a loss of trust, but that's another matter. Okay, so that part of it I agree. As to her formulation of Cold War 2.0, I tend to have some disagreement with it, because I think we are already in a messy multipolar world. The Cold War 2.0 had a kind of a binary choice, if you like, the Soviet Union, and then there was the US, with very little interaction between the two. I think we live in a much more complex and intertwined world, even with a country like India, which is only a 4 trillion economy, as opposed to China, which is 14, 15 trillion. The services aspect, it is very, very integrated. No matter what the MAGA crowd says, I'm not sure the American economy will do well if they really shoot themselves in the foot in terms of H-1B, in terms of putting pressure on American companies and so on. That will come back to bite them. I also believe, the last point, Barkha, in this segment that I want to make to you, I think India has also not kind of said in this meeting with Xi Jinping that we will do a 360-degree turn. I just draw your attention to the visit to Japan, where we have said things about the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And that will bother China. The Chinese are smart. They would have looked at what the joint statement says in terms of the joint security cooperation between Japan and India. It's also interesting for me that Xi Jinping has used the word strategic and long-term. He says, look at the relationship from a long-term perspective. And that is because he says border issues will take long-term. Don't expect an immediate solution to the problem just now. So all in all, I think this is an event that cannot be underestimated. And certainly both leaders are shrewdly signaling to Trump that, listen, you can mess with us, but we have options. The two leaders have kept their options. They've kept their options absolutely open. It is, despite the power differential between China and India, India can make a few decisions vis-a-vis China, I believe, which can actually cause a lot of discomfiture to the US and the West. So I think it is signaling by two important leaders, and we will see the meeting with Putin tomorrow. That will be another event to signal. But all in all, I think where the only, like I said, Ms. Velina makes excellent points, but the only difference I would have is that rather than Cold War 2.0, where I think the line was clear, this is a much more messy geopolitical world we are looking at. It's a multipolar world yet to take shape, with different powers jostling. And you have the three great powers, frankly. Russia has certainly announced itself as a great power, whether we like it or not. The Europeans will hate me for saying it, but that's a reality. And then, of course, you have China and the US. And other powers are just jostling for space in this messy geopolitical world that we are seeing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting formulation there about a messy geopolitical world. And I want to take that to Ali, because, you look specifically at US-China relations. And when you hear Velina say it's Cold War 2.0, are the lines that clear in your estimation? Are the lines that clear? Trump, if anything, if Trump is anything, he seeks to be a deal maker. He's probably frustrated right now because he hasn't been able to make a deal at the Alaska Summit. He hasn't been able to come home with a successful announcement. He wanted acknowledgement of a purported role that India denies he played in the brokering of peace between India and Pakistan. So he's irritated on that score. He may want to make a deal with China, is the sense of many of us here in India. I'm wondering how you read that.
So, a couple of points. One, I think he definitely wants to make a deal. I think and per his desire to make a deal, there's been a very significant shift, and I think the perceived and I would say the real balance of leverage between the United States and China since Liberation Day. This was on April 2nd when the Trump administration announced that big initial tranche of tariffs. I think that the Trump administration thought that because China is dealing with a lot of structural economic issues, its baseline level of growth is slowing down, demographic decline is sitting in, the real estate sector is having a number of issues. I think that there was a calculation inside the Trump administration that if the United States were to hit China hard with tariffs and ratchet them up, that China would wave the white flag and say, look, we're going to make some concessions, we're going to recalibrate, we're going to change our economic model. Not only did China not wave the white flag economically, but it's now discovered in recent months it has a very potent source of leverage vis-a-vis the United States, namely rare earths processing and production. And that is a source of leverage for which the United States doesn't have a ready answer, which is why I think we've seen in the past 3 months a series of backtrackings on the part of the United States. Backtracking on tariffs, so bringing them essentially to pre-Liberation Day levels, backtracking on allowing NVIDIA to sell H20 chips to China. And I think that Xi Jinping's feeling is that Trump wants to deal with him much more, or needs to deal with him much more than the other way around, number one. And number two, just on the point of China's leverage, not only vis-a-vis the United States, I think that one of the most significant trends in just the past few months has been China's growing foreign policy space. So if you're China, what do you see? You see that the United States is increasingly pursuing an economic deal with you. You see that India, again, not born out of affinity and not born out of strategic trust, but I think born out of a sense of necessity, is taking an increasingly conciliatory posture towards it. And Russia, of course, is increasingly dependent on China. So I think that if you're China, you feel that your foreign policy freedom of maneuver is expanding. And as you said, I think that the United States was hoping to score, I think, some quick diplomatic deals. It was hoping for a quick deal with China. I think it was hoping for a quick resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. But I think that short-term deal making, it has its utility, but not necessarily when it comes to mitigating long-term sources of strategic competition. Oh, I think we can't.
Sorry, I muted myself by mistake. I said, I think that's a really interesting and important point about how this is actually not just China's choke points with the United States of America, which it is able to leverage, but the fact, General Dua, and this could be a matter of some concern for India, that all of this may result in a more powerful China. And in the long run, is that really in India's interest? But in the meantime, let me also pick up a comment from our audience. Prasad says, Barkha, if there are Chinese PL-15s pitted against our Sukhois and Rafales, there are F-16s as well against our jets. We have to move beyond these to pursue our strategic interests multilaterally. What I'm really hearing Ali there say, though, and I tend to agree with him, that as a short-term maneuver, I think Ambassador Kumar is absolutely correct that it's a signaling by leaders to say we have options. I think there's merit in what Velina says about India's role as a bridge builder. But I also think Ali's point is really important, that right now, this is adding more heft to China. This is all turning into a stronger China, which I think in the long run will make India uncomfortable. We may say today that we are development partners, but I don't think any of us really believe that China is going to ever be a partner in the growth of Asia, in the rise of Asia. I don't think we think that.
Yes, yes, I would agree with that statement. That we can't, like I also ended up by my last intervention by saying we need to be wary. So you're right, this will add or enhance China's heft. But at the present moment, we need to go with the cards that we have. And like I said, and like everyone has been talking about the fact that, everything has started sort of happening because of Trump's tariffs. I mean, this particular development that Modi is now attending, while the SCO summit was pre-decided, but, Prime Minister Modi's attendance wasn't sure. And that's happened. Don't forget, yesterday, the president of Brazil has actually called for an emergency meeting of BRICS. So that's happening on another front. And that's again, a very different construct. SCO is a very different construct. But all these are somehow happening because of Trumpism, if I may use a word. This is happening. Now, the fact is, we have our issues. Like your viewer correctly, whoever very correctly pointed out that we have the Chinese platforms that are arrayed against. We also have the Pakistani, I beg your pardon, the American F-16s there with Pakistan. But with the cards that we have now, we must keep our guard up. But I think the time has come for a different construct to start emerging, and it doesn't emerge in one day. For example, let me just move away from the point only to get back to it. India and many other countries have, for the longest time, been saying that we perhaps should be in the permanent members of the UN Security Council. Remember that when after World War I, the League of Nations was established. After World War II, the League of Nations was not amended. The United Nations was established. Every different construct came about. So, whenever things will happen, I think a new or a different construct will come about. Velina has one sort of version of it, and then she said Cold War 2.0. So similarly, we need this. This is a churn, and that's why I said earlier that these Trump's tariff will perhaps go down, not only to India, but mainly to India now that we're discussing, will go down as one of the inflection points where all these churns start happening. So wariness against China notwithstanding, and we must guard against, like you said, China will gain more heft. But every cons that we think of should not hold India back from doing what we think we should be doing at the moment.
Yeah, I think let me bring in Velina at this point. Velina, you spoke about a managed confrontation. Even Ambassador Kumar has been, I don't know if he still feels it, has had some optimism that India-US will mend. But look at how, I'm just giving you a sense of the sentiment in India. We have another comment from our viewer, Saurabh, the India-US relationship is headed to a new nadir. The US is now demanding that EU members levy secondary sanctions and tariffs on India for purchasing Russian oil. Time to wake up. And I have to say that, it seems, as you said, not about Russian oil. It seems deeply personal. You have the New York Times now reporting that Trump is personally piqued. It all seems to be linked to some sort of India's refusal to massage the American president's ego, to a refusal to say you played this role in Operation Sindoor, a refusal to say we think you should get the Nobel Prize. And then you have his aides, Navarro and others, doubling down and using very personal language, very coarse language for India. And then you have a sentiment building up. Imagine the Americans are now saying to Europe, you should also impose tariffs, you should also impose sanctions. This doesn't seem to be anything to do with trade. It really seems to have zilch to do with trade anymore.
Well, it has to do with trade, of course, but at the core of this, of what's happening with the tariffs policies is actually something else. And it's what's about geopolitical realignment. That means that behind the whole facade of the tariffs policies, you need to finally realize that this administration, and I would argue that it's not going to be only this administration, but for the years to come, any future administration will try to exercise real pressure with all coercion and all the toolbox they have, not only on competitors, but more so on allies, to side with the United States. We are indeed, and sorry to highlight it once again for you, I do understand the whole multipolarity thesis, because the majority of my colleagues have been propagating it for many years now. And the point here is that even if you take a look at those actors attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you will clearly see the dividing line, that is this thin red line of the so-called multipolarity, because some of them are aligned with NATO and with Western rules-based order. Take the example of Turkey, which is an actor that is navigating and that has a certain strategic autonomy to navigate, has still trade relationship with Russia, has a solid relationship with China, and yet it's a NATO ally. If there would be an activation of Article 5, Turkey has the second largest NATO army. Just to give you a clear example that most of the so-called, like all of the European powers, they don't have the strategic autonomy to act. And I can clearly give you the example with the tariffs policies, which, by the way, meanwhile, is openly admitted by the very same people who have been negotiating with Trump, that has been a blackmail. That hasn't been a negotiation, but a real blackmail. Now, coming back to your question, here we are in this kind of really toxic and volatile phase of the international relations, and India, contrary to the other so-called multipolarity actors at the metal level, let's put USA, China, and Russia aside, because these are three great powers that will exercise military power at any time when their national interest is affected. I think we are in agreement on that. And here we are, where India has the very same tools to exercise military power. I mean, we saw it quite vividly following the escalation with Pakistan. We saw it also following the deterioration of the relationship with United States, where at the core was exactly that. It was Pakistan. It was the reluctance of India to side with the United States based on a US premise and based on US national interest, because India has its own national interest. And for that sake, it would have had to kind of give up on the relationship with Russia, which India will not do for its own interest. So here we are, where there is a lot of space to navigate. Yes, I do agree with my colleagues. There are a lot of multipolar constellations when it comes to trade or economy, or if you like, defense deals and so on. But at the core of it, there will be a hard decision to make. Which bloc are you aligned with in the long run? And I would argue that India probably will be a kind of a different leader, not in the sense of a non-alignment, because this time, and it was rightfully pointed out, it's an interconnected global system. So we have to deal with each other the one way or the other. It's impossible to isolate ourselves. But India will be in a different position, taking the best from both worlds, of course, by paying a very heavy price for strategic autonomy. That's it. That's the difference to the European powers. That's the big difference to the European powers.
Okay, we have to close. I'll allow Ambassador Kumar just a quick 30-second summing up. What would you be looking out in particular at the Putin-Modi meeting? What would you be looking out for?
Really engaging with Russia and doing all the things that we want to do, but better, because he will want to send a very strong signal to the world that he's not buckling down. I just want to conclude by saying India is not yet a great power, but we are a middle power. And when great powers put pressure on middle powers will react by playing all sides, playing all the cards and playing the long game. I think that's what India is doing.
I think that's something we can all agree on. The long game is being played. It is a signaling that India will not roll over and play dead, anything but. I think, Ambassador Kumar, that is the bottom line, right? That you have India carving out its own space, asserting that we're going to do this our own way. And as has been said by everybody here, there will be a price to that. And we're taking that price. You have the Prime Minister on record saying he believes it might even be a personal price for him to pay, and he's ready to pay that. So we leave it there. The Chinese are often like to say we live in interesting times, and that would have to be one hell of an understatement for the times we're living in right now in this week. Lots ahead. This story isn't over yet. As they say in Hindi, picture abhi baki hai. There's still a lot for the movie before it ends. We leave it there. Ali Wine, Velina Shakarova, Gerald Dua, and Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. Thank you, and everybody have a great weekend. See you soon. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.